Hi, everyone. Welcome to the October 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. As I mentioned last week, this week on the podcast, we're going to talk about the Breeders' Cup races. Of the two podcasts we're doing this week, we're going to split up the Breeders' Cup races and give a little preview. Today, we're going to be talking about the Friday Breeders' Cup races, all of the two-year-old events. And then on Friday's podcast, the TimeformUS Forecast, which we do usually a preview of the weekend races. Instead, we're going to do a preview of the Saturday Breeders' Cup races. The pre-entries are not coming out until tomorrow, but we have a pretty good idea of who's going to be running in these races. So we'll give an overview of the likely contenders. Just want to mention also that you can get DRF Advanced PPs on the DRF website at drf.com, Classic PPs Formulator, as well as the TimeformUS Breeders' Cup package, which Craig and I will be contributing to. And Craig and I, we're going to save the in-depth handicapping for later, but today we're just going to try to recap some of our thoughts on these horses. Let's just dive right in, Craig, and begin with the Juvenile Turf Sprint. This race looks pretty wide open, but I will say it seems like Wesley Ward has a pretty strong hand.
He does. I think, for me, four-wheel drive is clearly the horse to beat. Maybe that's not the one that'll get bet the most, but from a figure perspective, he's been the fastest in his two starts. He obviously showed plenty of talent before he ran. He debuted in the stakes race at Colonial Downs. Went right up, won in the Futurity with a pretty easy win over Freewheeler, who I imagine is being pointed to this race as well. So he's the one to beat. My big thing with this, and I made a really nice score in our BC package last year on this race, is I'm just going to be against the Euro sprinting on turf. And until they show me they can beat the North American horses, they just don't seem to have that same level of speed. There's not as good out of the gate. So I'm sure some will come over and they'll look good on the PPs. But my main thing is I will probably be against them.
Yeah, it does seem like there are quite a few Euros pointing to this race, but I agree with you that seems like four-wheel drive probably is the horse to beat. We'll see if they go more strongly for him or for the filly Kamari, which is also a highly touted runner for Wesley Ward. I agree with everything you said about four-wheel drive. I thought his Futurity win was really impressive. I mean, it just seems like this horse has a lot of gears to him. He's got a versatile running style where he doesn't really need the lead. He seems perfectly comfortable sitting off another horse. And I think that's really important going the 5 furlongs at Santa Anita. I think you want to have some tactical speed. It's going to be a little dicey trying to pass too many horses going this short distance. And four-wheel drive has shown that he can do that. He's got that versatility. And I just thought the Futurity, I know it was just a 6-horse field, but I really felt like the Futurity was a pretty strong race. I know a number of horses out of that race are pointing to this Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint, but four-wheel drive just seems head and shoulders above those. As for Kamari, I think a lot of people were impressed by the fact that she changed up her running style and beat the boys in the Indian Summer last time. That was not the strongest field, though, and she's yet to really run a figure that makes her as fast as four-wheel drive.
Right, that's where I'm going with that. And I don't know that style she showed last time is going to be very effective. It will be interesting to see the post draw. I will tweet out some post position stats for the 5 furlong races at Santa Anita as we get closer to the race. It's something I like to do for Breeders' Cup races. But I imagine if you're drawn inside, you better have some speed or you're going to get shuffled back and not have time to make it up. So maybe outside draws will be preferred. We'll have to see, but she's an intriguing filly. I guess normally I would think it's a good thing when a horse can win wire to wire and then come from essentially last after taking a mild bump at the start last time. But as you mentioned, from a speed figure perspective, she doesn't really match up quite yet. So at a short price, she's one I will probably be against.
Yeah, I imagine she's going to take a lot of money because there's a lot of hype around her. But it does seem like Wesley Ward almost let the running style change happen because he took the blinkers off after her first couple starts, and she really did relax much better in that race in Saratoga. So maybe she's just a more versatile horse than she showed early in her career. But I agree with everything you said about her needing to get faster to do well in this race. An intriguing horse that I think would be a contender if they chose this race is Fair Maiden, but it sounds like that her connections, Godolphin and Owen Hardy, are leading towards running in the mile race, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf. I kind of wonder if they should reconsider and go to this 5 furlong race because Fair Maiden's 2 sprint races would make her a major contender in here.
Yeah, I agree. She was the next horse I was actually going to bring up. She ran so fast, breaking her maiden at Arlington over the synthetic surface, won by almost 15 lengths, I think it was. Came back at Woodbine in a stake and just romped again. And then she showed up in the Natalma. She was the heavy favorite. It was a mile, yielding turf course, and it was really a weirdly run race. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm not sure how much I like her if she does go in the juvenile fillies turf. But in the sprint, I definitely think she would be a force for sure because, as you mentioned, with four-wheel drive, she's another that has shown she doesn't need to lead. She's able to sit off the pace and make up ground. And I think the sprint will be a better choice for her. So I'll be interested to see what direction they go.
Now, to wrap up the discussion of the horses that might be short prices, I think we have to touch upon one of the Euros. And the one that looks like he's coming in with the best credentials is A. Ollie, the Simon Crisford trained son of Society Rock. He's coming off a win in the Flying Childers at Doncaster last time, going 5 furlongs on a straightaway. He was no match for Earthlight, who's one of the top sprinter 2-year-olds in Europe in the Pre-Morny two-back. But he's run well in most of his starts, and I know Frankie Dettori is high on this one. He's ridden him in all 3 of his victories. But like you were saying, the Euros, they sometimes struggle in this race.
They do. The turn, it's a sharp turn. They're usually all been running on straightaways for the most part. The footing's going to be a little bit different. You really got to get out of the gate good in these sprints here, and that doesn't, they, seem to have some problems there. So, I mean, he certainly has time form ratings that stack up in our advanced edition of the PPs. He hit a 101 3-back. He ran a 96 last time out, which is kind of close up there with four-wheel drive. So, I wouldn't totally dismiss him, but I just don't like these Euros coming up. That does bring me to one thing. I saw you ask for some questions, and people asked for the turf conditions overseas, and I wanted to bring up the point that we do actually adjust those to kind of match what we will see here. If you look at A. Ollie in his last race, it's actually listed at firm, which I'm sure if you look in Timeform or Racing Post or one of the products from overseas, it probably doesn't say firm, but we've kind of modified ours so they match what we're used to seeing here in the States.
Yeah, and when they do rate those courses good to firm or firm as they rate them in RPPs, as they show up rather, those courses can get pretty firm in Europe. I know people always assume that there's always a little bit of give and the courses are well watered over there. But I mean, there are plenty of times that they run some pretty quick clockings and the courses can play just as quick as an American course. So I don't think it's always the right assumption that European horses necessarily like softer going. Although you do want to note that when the courses are rated soft over there, they typically can be much softer than courses that we'd ever race over in this country. Typically, when we get that much rain, we take the races off the turf and run them on their dirt courses, but they don't do that in Europe. They'll run over the courses because they have such wide, expansive courses that can run over different parts of them, so they have more options with that regard. But do pay attention to horses that really excel over truly soft ground in Europe, because sometimes that form's not going to translate to the U.S.
Yeah, that's a good point. We very rarely run on that. I remember Preakness Day, I think it was last year, we ran on what was basically a bog, but it's very rarely happens over here.
There are a lot of horses we could discuss in this turf sprint. Just a couple of others that I want to briefly touch upon. Cambria is another Wesley Ward horse, I think the third of 4 that he's potentially pointing to this race. She won a close decision in one of those high pursed races at Kentucky Downs for the 2-year-olds going 6.5 furlongs. She beat Chimney Rock, who's the same horse that Kimari beat in the Indian Summer. I think Cambria's got to get a little bit faster, but this filly, she's pretty gritty. She's got a nice pedigree on her. I'm not going to be shocked if she's okay. I just think she has more to prove at this point.
Yeah, she's been a little slow compared to the others. She ran a 90 in that Kentucky Downs race. Those are always a little suspect because they don't time races particularly well there. There's a lot of hand timing, or you get final times only off the photo finish system. So the 90 is, it is what it is. It's the best you can do with the data that we have. She hadn't run particularly fast winning her first 2 on synthetic tracks at Presque Downs, but she's 3 for 3, so I wouldn't totally dismiss her. She doesn't have to be on the lead. In fact, she has never been on the lead. She makes a strong late run, so I wouldn't be surprised if she's one that's coming late.
One other horse that intrigued me when I was going through this race, because I have to make the odds for these Friday two-year-old races for the Breeders' Cup Advanced Edition that we released for DRF, was Miss Jane McKay, a filly taking on the boys here. She's based down at Laurel, and she won a stakes race there going 5.5 furlongs in late September. She's a horse that was controversially DQ'd out of a victory in the Colleen at Monmouth 2 back, but I thought she really bounced back well in that Laurel race last time. I don't know what she was beating, but she was really visually impressive there.
Yeah, I don't have her TimeformUS PPs in front of us, but I see she got an 86 buyer last time, which is certainly competitive in this field. And she's finished in front all 3 starts, all times by open lengths. Even when she was DQ'd, she was clearly the best horse in the race. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So she's certainly a factor in here. She's one I actually like a bit outside of four-wheel drive. And I like her running style as well. She's been able to be right up on the pace. And then last time she showed that new versatility, being able to come from well back. She was a good 7 lengths back early and still win easy. So no doubt she's a contender in my eye. And another thing, we've talked about several fillies in here. In a race like this, I just don't think it matters. The fillies at this point in their careers, particularly going 5 furlongs, can certainly compete with the boys if they're good enough.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You see it routinely in Europe, where the top fillies can transfer their form to the male races, especially when they're 2-year-olds. A little bit less so when they get older, but with the 2-year-olds, as you were saying, it doesn't really seem to matter. Let's move on to a couple of the mile turf races, beginning with the juvenile fillies turf. And this one, another one that's a pretty wide open race. And I think you really can put the horses into the 2 categories, the Americans and the Europeans, and we should probably discuss them separately. Of the Americans, I would imagine the horse that's going to be the shortest price, and she might be the favorite overall, is Sweet Melania, just because I know so many people were so taken with her runaway victory in the Jessamine last time. What do you make of her? And I know that race didn't get as high of a speed figure as you were kind of anticipating, but she still looked pretty good doing it.
Yeah, visually she looked really good. I don't really have any knocks. I mean, she ran a 103. It's not like it was a terrible figure. It certainly stacks up well in this field. It's probably the best last race figure that we have. I haven't really looked at the Euros yet. I will be interested to see what's coming over. And when I say looked, I mean, I know the horses and the races, but I haven't looked at the time form ratings or watched a whole lot of replays yet, just because there's so many. I'm waiting for the pre-entries to be official. But no real problem with Sweet Melania. I mean, she did run well. It's just when you watched it visually, I thought it would be more than a 103. But again, for a 2-year-old, a 103 is not bad. And I do think she's the one to beat out of the American fillies.
Now, she finished a neck behind Cristal 2 back in the PG Johnson. Do you think that she just took a big step forward out of that race, or would her performance in the Jessamine sort of upgrade some of the horses that are coming out of the Miss Grillo, where Cristal actually lost to Selflessly, who broke her maiden that day for Chad Brown? My problem with Cristal is her running style. I mean, she just breaks slowly every time, goes to the back of the pack, has to pass them all. It's tough to do that in the Breeders' Cup.
It is. To answer your first question, I just think that Sweet Melania probably took a step forward. I think you normally have to think that with these 2-year-olds. As a figure maker, I have to do that, or as you'll get a bit of shrinkage in the figure. So I'm really careful with that. My general thought is that 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds are getting better as the year moves on. So that's how I'm going to go with that one. Cristal, I couldn't agree more. She causes a lot of trouble for herself. She's really pace dependent. She didn't get a whole lot of pace last time to run into, but I mean, that's just what it's going to be like for her. Unless she gets out of the gate better and shows a little more early speed, she's always going to be at the mercy of those up front.
One American-based runner who probably would be a pretty short price in this race if she ran, although I don't know if the intention is definitely to run her, and I don't even know if they pre-enter her if she would necessarily make it into the field, is the recent debut winner, Princessa Caroline, for Chad Brown, who earned a nice speed figure in her debut at Belmont a few weeks ago, winning that race by 3.5 lengths over a decent field. She, of course, is the half-sister to Lady Eli. She's by American Pharoah, so the pedigree is definitely there. It's a tall order to ask a horse who's just had one start to step up into the Breeders' Cup, but I know they're considering it, and I imagine she'd take a lot of money if she got into the race.
She would. She might even take some of mine if the price drifted up some because she looked really good first time out. It seemed like it was a bit of a surprise for her connections and her breeding. She was a little dead on the board, which surprised me. I think she paid $11 or something that day, but she certainly didn't run like it. She ran more like a 4 to 5 shot in there and just was very visually impressive. So maybe she fooled the connections, but coming in, but certainly not coming out if they're looking at this race. And I really liked her. She got an 83 buyer there. I don't remember our TimeformUS off the top of my head. I do think it was over the 100 mark. So she certainly fits in here.
Yeah, I believe the horse that was second, her Laughable, is coming back and running at Belmont this week. So it'll be interesting to see how she does because she was well clear of the rest of the field. As for the European runners, I think the two that look like they're coming in with by far the best form are Albania, who's based in Ireland, and Dye, who's, I believe, based in England for Roger Varian. Albania won the Prix Marcel Boussac at Longchamp last time. That was the Arc de Triomphe undercard. You might remember the Arc de Triomphe was run over very testing ground. It's rated as soft. So she really relished the ground that day, going the mile distance. She, in her prior start, had lost the Moigler stud. She had been one of the short prices there in Ireland, and she finished sixth behind Dye, who was second in there, and Love, an Aidan O'Brien horse, won that race. Both of these fillies, they should have no trouble getting the mile. Albania did it last time in the Marcel Boussac, and Dye's effectively gone 7 furlongs overseas, and that form often translates to a mile in the U.S. I mean, they got Group 1 form in Europe, and usually that kind of form translates very well to the American races.
Yeah, no doubt. Before I talk about her, I want to mention Princess Caroline. She ran a 109 in her debut, and the fifth place horse has already come back to win from that race. So it's probably a pretty strong race. As far as Albania goes, my only real question with her would be that soft ground last time, but she did handle good ground her first couple times out. She ran nice figures doing it. So I would think she is certainly the strongest of the Euros. We don't see a lot of grade 1 or group 1 form coming over here, and usually in these juvenile races, but we're getting it here. So I expect her to be a strong foe.
Yeah, I agree. Those 3 horses, if they make the trip, they look like they're very strong contenders in this race. Let's move on to the male version of this race, the Juvenile Turf. And again, this race has a pretty strong European flavor to it. And I think we can probably start with one of the European contenders because it sounds like Aidan O'Brien is leaning towards bringing over Arizona. And he'd be a pretty tough horse for the Americans to take on if he makes the trip because he finished second last time out in the Group 1 Dewhurst, just 2 lengths behind Pinatubo, who I know we talked about on the podcast before. Pinatubo, if you don't know, I mean, he's an undefeated 2-year-old in Europe who I think many consider to be the best 2-year-old they've seen over there probably since Frankel. And Arizona got pretty close to him last time. I don't think he was ever going to win that race, but he certainly put in a strong performance in the Dewhurst. I mean, if he brings that form over here, the Americans are going to be in trouble.
Yeah, no kidding. Pinatubo would probably be 1 to 5 in this field, so he was only a couple lengths behind him last time. Some people might have some reservations because he's only gone as far as 7 furlongs, but that really hasn't proven to be too much of a problem for Europeans coming over. If they run 7 over here, they usually handle a mile, no problem. And that's not just 2-year-olds. That's even true of the horses that enter the mile for the older horses later on. So I will be really interested if this one comes over. You're going to have to make a decision on him because he might be a horse some people might want to single because he will be a short price if he shows up.
And part of that is due to the fact that the American horses, they look okay, but they haven't really distinguished themselves and run particularly fast speed figures. I mean, the one that would probably take the most money is Chad Brown's undefeated runner Structor, son of Palace Malice, who's coming off a close decision where he won the Pilgrim last time. What did you make of the Pilgrim overall? And do you think Structor is a strong contender in this race?
This is the one where I would really lean towards Euros. With the fillies, I'm not so sure yet, but with this one, I just haven't been impressed by the 2-year-olds much at all. They haven't run fast. Structor won that with a 99 TimeformUS speed figure, and it wasn't one of those races where it was too hindered by the pace. I think the pace was solid enough, and I just think they're okay, and I think they're ripe for the picking if a good shipper does come over here.
Yeah, the other American two-year-old that's likely to take money in this spot is Decorated Invader, who's coming off a win in the summer up at Woodbine. I mean, I've been impressed by this horse. I thought he was a really professional two-year-old at Saratoga. I liked what he did in those maiden races. And he did everything right in the summer stakes, too. Just not sure how strong that summer was overall.
Yeah, same. I totally agree with you there. And the other one I'd maybe look at is Peace Achieved among the Americans. He's won 3 in a row. He took the Grade 3 Bourbon last time at Keeneland. He won one of those big purse races at Kentucky Downs. So he seems to be in good form, and he's actually hit the 100 mark at least a couple of times, which most of these haven't done in here. So again, out of the Americans, maybe he's the one I would like the most, but it's just going to depend. And of course, we got to wait on the post positions. It's probably going to be a big field, a full gate, where you won't want to be too far outside on that Santa Anita course.
Yeah, speaking of the Bourbon, a horse that I might want out of there is Vitalogy, who was second. I know we talked about him a little bit when we were recapping this race on the Pacecast a couple weeks ago. But he had a pretty tough trip in that Bourbon. I mean, it was a 14-horse field. He was last early, had to come extremely wide to make his late run, and he still almost ran down Peace Achieved, finishing second there. So, I mean, it's going to be tough to close from that far back at another 14-horse field in the Breeders' Cup. But I think Vitalogy is a pretty good two-year-old, or at least among the best ones that we've seen in action in the United States. I don't really know what other Euros are definitely coming over. I know Aiden O'Brien's talked about the Royal Lodge winner, Royal Dornoch, perhaps coming, but he was an upset winner of that race, and not sure how strong that race was from a quality standpoint. So we'll wait and see what the pre-entries say. But I kind of agree with you that Arizona is going to be a pretty tough horse to handle if he does come over for this race. Let's head over to the dirt races, beginning with the fillies in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. And this is going to be a fun race to handicap because I think you've got 4 contenders who are going to take a lot of money. None of them have faced each other, so you've got to decide which horse coming from which circuit is the strongest. Let's begin with the local filly, Bast, who's coming off a win in the Chandelier last time. Now, she had created a lot of buzz when she was a runaway winner of the Del Mar Debutante when she broke her maiden. The Chandelier, though, she was bet down to 1-5, and she had to work pretty hard to put away Comical.
She did. This is a race that's going to cause a lot of people to scratch their heads, I think, with Bast. I personally think she got a 95 TimeformUS speed figure from us with a 99 final time. But my personal opinion is it was totally the effect of pace. They just went way too slow in that race. She was able to sit right off of Comical, who has been a pretty good sprinter in her own right. She won the Schuylerville at Saratoga back in July. She didn't do as well as things got, as races got tougher and longer. But when you let a horse of her quality just lope along on the lead, basically crawling, and then try to out-sprint her for the last couple furlongs, it's not going to reflect very well when it comes to speed figures. So I think Bast is probably a lot better than that 95 or whatever it was she got last time, and more like the 105 we saw when she won the Del Mar Debutante.
And she's got that home court advantage because she's been training at Santa Anita. She's got that race over the track last time, and sometimes that can count for a little bit when we hold these major days in California. British Idiom for Brad Cox. She won the Alcibiades last time. She had actually won one of those auction-restricted maiden races at Saratoga, going 6 furlongs over the summer, but she took a big step forward on the stretch out, that Alcibiades. I mean, Perfect Alibi, who was second. I mean, we didn't think she was the best two-year-old filly out there, but she had shown some quality in those 2 stakes wins at Saratoga, and she just dusted her, British Idiom. So she's passed the 2-turn test already, and she can stalk a little bit. She looks like a pretty strong contender.
Yeah, I was really impressed with British Idiom. She ran a nice 102 speed figure, and she didn't do it the easy way. She sat just off of a fast pace. We have the half-mile coded in red, so it was pretty quick, and she was wide on the turn, and she just blew by the field. I was really impressed, both visually, numerically, she fits with Bast. So I think between the 2 we've talked about so far, it's just a question of price and what you're going to get on them, because I think they're 2 pretty closely matched fillies.
Now, I think one of the talking points in this race is going to be the fact that Bast and British Idiom have already gone the 2 turns before, whereas the other filly that's going to take a lot of money coming out of a stakes win, Wicked Whisper, has only gone the 1 turn. She was very impressive winning the Frisette last time, beating Frank's Rocket, who had been one of the highly touted 2-year-olds in the sprint races going back to the summer. And I think you have to ask yourself with Wicked Whisper, how much faster could she have run? Because she hasn't really been set down for her best in either start. She's just won these races with so much ease. She's bred to stretch out further because she's a half to Point of Honor, who, of course, was second in the Alabama earlier this year. So it seems like she's got everything going her way. Just how much of a negative do you think it is having to do 2 turns for the first time in a race like the Breeders' Cup?
You know, it's tough to say. It's been done before. Horses have stretched out from even 7 and won these juvenile races. She certainly looked good doing it. I remember watching the race live when they were on the turn, and I actually thought Frank's Raquette was going to give her a run for her money. And she just dug in, and it was a no contest to the wire. So she got a 104. So, again, she fits right in with Bast and with British Idiom. So, you know, I'm not going to knock her too much because she hasn't went 2 turns. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And given her speed with a good draw, and it depends who else lines up against her, it could even be an advantage. It's certainly easier, in my opinion, to win a 2-turn race going wire to wire than it is a 1-turn mile.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. A horse that has to answer the 2-turn question as well as the stakes question is Donna Veloce. She's got a lot of obstacles to overcome in this spot, but there's no question that she possesses a lot of talent because she only's made 1 start. But I mean, boy, was it something to behold when she won that 6.5 furlong maiden race in her debut at Santa Anita, winning by almost 10 lengths, doing it seemingly with pretty much ease. I mean, she just dominated that field. She's got to stretch out. She's got to try stakes foes. But she's run fast enough and she's bred to do it. I'm feeling she's going to take a lot of money in this spot, and that's maybe a negative. But I'm not going to be surprised if she turns out to be very good.
No, I won't either. If I had to pick one I didn't like among what are probably the 4 main ones, she's probably the one I would throw out just because the distance question. But also, she just didn't beat much at all in that last race. It wasn't a very impressive group coming in. I know she had shown a lot in the morning, which was a big part of why she was 3 to 5, but it also had to do with the horses she was facing. They didn't look like a strong group on paper, and none of them really showed up. She set a slow pace on the lead. And again, these kind can fool you. She could go out and win by 5 with a big number, and it wouldn't shock me. But as a betting guy, I'd be more against her than any of the other 3.
She's got a fascinating pedigree. I mean, she's by a Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner in Uncle Mo, and her dam is actually out of a Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies winner, Cash Run, who won the Juvenile Fillies for Dwayne Lucas, I think, in the late 90s. So she's bred to be precocious, obviously, and she showed that she was first time out. She's intriguing. I agree. I don't know if I'd want to take a short price on her in a race like this, where there are 3 other legitimate contenders who have already proven themselves going the route distances, but she definitely is a wild card in this race. I don't think any of the others are really horses we have to discuss. I think they're all probably going to be double-digit odds once you get past these top 4. I don't know. Did anybody else strike you as one that you were interested in?
No, I did mention Comical early. She only got beat a little bit by Bass, but of the 2, I'd be way more against her. Now, she's probably going to be a bigger price, but she obviously had the dream trip of life, just sitting there, going slow on the lead, no real I mean, she had pressure and that Bass was right next to her, but they were basically just cantering. So I would be totally against her. Not that that's a surprise that the odds we're probably going to see her at.
Now, kind of like the Juvenile Fillies, the Juvenile is shaping up as a pretty similar race where the quality is really concentrated towards the top. And about once you get past the top 4 or 5 contenders, the quality just really drops off. But the 3 horses that are going to take the most money in this race look like they're pretty talented, and all of them would be deserving winners of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. The horses that are going to vie for favoritism are probably Dennis's Moment and 8 Rings. Dennis's Moment created a ton of buzz when he nearly broke the track record at Ellis Park, breaking his maiden back in July. Obviously, he had that disastrous debut where he lost the rider, but he came right back and really hasn't put a foot wrong since. They tried him in stakes one time in the Iroquois last time, and I know he only won by a length and 3/4, but he was just on cruise control that day. Really looked good doing it, beat a good horse in Scabbard. Dennis's Moment just seems like he's coming into this race with all the tools to take that step forward and win the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, I really like him as much as good as Eight Rings has looked, and he has looked great other than the time when he ducked in at the shoot and threw his rider. Dennis's moment has looked fabulous. He's run faster. He had a 117 TimeformUS speed figure, followed by a 113 in that Iroquois win. Eight Rings has run a 109 and a 110. So, I mean, not a huge gap between the two, but I do think it's important. It's big enough to take note. Really no knocks at all on Dennis's moment. If you made me pick a third horse, I might even pick Scabbard. I was actually really impressed with his race in the Iroquois as well, maybe even more than Eight Rings. So no real knock on either of those two. And I assume we're going to talk about Maxfield as well. I'll save that for you. But the Ellis horses and the Kentucky horses actually impressed me a little bit more than Eight Rings in here.
Yeah, Eight Rings is kind of a funny horse. I mean, it's pretty hilarious that the top two horses that are going to be vying for favoritism in this race, they both drop their riders in starts. You rarely see that with top horses, but it happened to both of these runners. And Eight Rings, his American Pharaoh, it's a tough call for me because when I was first watching it, he kind of switched to his wrong lead late. He was a little green, looked like he was getting tired at the end. On the other hand, it was a pretty honest pace. And I know that the Santa Anita track was very demanding at that time of the meet when they first started running over it. It's gotten a little faster lately. So, I mean, I don't want to knock Eight Rings too much because he did win that race really easily. I'm just not sure if there was a ton of quality behind him. And he's run fast enough, but I still think he's got a little bit more to prove. And also, we don't know if he can rate behind another horse. We'll see how much speed ultimately draws into this race. Maybe he just controls on the front end again, because looking at the horses pointing to this race, that might be the case. It's going to be a fun matchup, though, because as you were alluding to with the TimeformUS speed figures, both of these horses have run some pretty high numbers for 2-year-olds at this time of year. So it's not like either one has to improve by that much to really kind of reach that par for winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile.
No, definitely not. I would say that the par is probably around 115. That's another thing I'll try to tweet out as we get closer to race time, the pars for these various races. But we'll also have the race ratings and the PPs, which are going to be very similar to those anyway. I am curious what you think about Maxfield. He's a horse that started out going a mile. It's a one-turn mile at Churchill and then stretched out to 2 turns. He doesn't have much speed at all, but he sure seems to have a good finishing kick.
I'm a fan of his. I think he might be a horse for the future, and I'm not sure he's necessarily a horse for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. As impressive as his Breeders' Futurity was, because if you watch that race, he looked like a Rossi coming around the far turn, just flying past those horses, and it looked like Gouverneur Morris was making a run to be competitive, and he just kind of flicked them away at the top of the stretch. That said, I'm not sure that Gouverneur Morris really ran the race that was expected of him last time, because the rest of the field after those two, just not sure how much quality was really there. Maxfield has not run quite as fast as Dennis's Moment or Eight Rings yet. I mean, he seems like a horse that's going to keep stepping forward with added seasoning and more distance. Just going the mile on the 16th again, I wonder if he can make up the ground on those two horses that have already run faster than him.
Yeah, I'm curious. And I do got to hear what you think about Scabbard. I got to watch his race a couple more times. I do think he had a little trouble last time and was really flying late. But I think the trouble might have been exaggerated a little bit with the way I heard people talk about it. No doubt it inhibited him just a little, but I was still impressed either way.
Yeah, I don't think he was ever going to beat Dennis's Moment, but he did lose momentum at a critical point coming around the far turn. And when you're a closer, you never want to have that happen. He's a really strong finisher. He just keeps coming in all of his races. I mean, he obviously flew home in that debut, a race that didn't come up that fast, but he's just taken big step forwards in his subsequent 2 starts. I really liked the way he was closing at Dennis's Moment last time. And I know people will say that Dennis's Moment was geared down, and I heard people say he could have won that race by many more lengths. I don't know if that's really true, but Scabbard was getting to him at the end, whether or not that horse was being geared down or not. And he just seems like one that has no trouble handling the distance. Again, we'll see how much pace there really is in this Breeders' Cup Juvenile, because just kind of looking over the preliminary PPs, it doesn't seem like there's that much speed in the field. And maybe that works in the favor of Eight Rings and Dennis's Moment and against horses like Maxfield and Scabbard. But I don't think there's some huge gap in quality between Dennis's Moment and these two horses that we just discussed. He'll be closing from off the pace.
No, I would agree. I should mention one of the pieces I'll be doing for the TimeformUS package, and I think some of it shows up in DRF as well, as I do a pace projector segment where we talk about the three races that are likely to have the biggest meltdowns or maybe races with no speed. And this one is definitely one that would probably fall in the latter category, which is really odd for 2-year-olds. Generally, you get a lot of horses that have been winning their races on the lead, and as distances get longer, that tends to swing a little bit. But this year, it doesn't look like that at all. So I'm really looking forward to this race, both from a betting standpoint and just seeing how the pace looks like it's going to shape up when we have the full field in front of us.
Yeah, I think these races, the 2-year-old races, are always really fun to handicap. We've got some strong favorites in the races this year, but I think there are a couple of spots, especially among the turf races, where you might be able to take some shots with a few long shots. We'll see how the races ultimately shape up. Again, the pre-entries are coming out tomorrow on Wednesday, so we'll obviously revise all of this analysis when we do our TimeformUS package next week. But hope this was just a helpful overview of all of these races. And Craig, I'm looking forward to discussing the Saturday races with you on Friday's podcast. Really some intriguing fields shaping up for those and some interesting news about European contenders coming over. Looking forward to discussing all of those with you on Friday.
Yeah, same here. It's this is my favorite time. Like most people, I love the Triple Crown season, but when it comes to Breeders' Cup, I think as bettors, it's definitely the time of year you want to be a horse racing fan. You're going to get overlays and races on really good horses that you would never see any other time of the year. So I really look forward to these 2 days of racing, even above the Derby and the other Triple Crown. And Belmont Day with its fabulous card, as good as they are, this is the highlight for me.
I totally agree with that. At the Breeders' Cup, sometimes you just need one score to really make it a great weekend, depending on how it shapes up for you. Well, that's it for this week. As always, you can listen to the TimeformUS Pacecast and the TimeformUS Forecast on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form. And again, we'll be doing that Friday podcast on the Saturday races, so tune into that. We'll talk again later in the week.